Expelled from his home by his own son, the billionaire called a secret meeting that changed everything. The day was cold, and the wind blew relentlessly through the gaps in the old windows of the house that once belonged to my parents. It was the house where I grew up and learned the principles that guided me throughout my life, but that day I was about to lose it all due to a betrayal. Carlos, my only son, the boy I had educated with my dreams and business, brought a document for me to sign. He claimed it was a routine matter, just a formality to finalize some ongoing projects. His voice was calm, perhaps a bit rushed, but steady. There was nothing in his behavior that made me suspect the storm that was approaching. "Dad, it's just a signature. Trust me, it's for our good, for the continuation of the company," he said, with a smile I knew so well, a smile that had always reassured me until then. I trusted him without reading the document, took the pen with hands that already felt the weight of the years, and signed. I could never have imagined that this simple act on what seemed to be an innocuous piece of paper would be my greatest mistake. The next day, the truth came out brutally. While I was in the garden removing the dry leaves that autumn insisted on depositing at the entrance of the house, a black car stopped in front of the house. Two well-dressed men got out, and a lawyer whom I immediately recognized as the legal advisor for my company said, "I'm sorry to inform you, but we need you to vacate the property immediately. The house now belongs to the company, and according to the documents you signed yesterday, you are no longer the owner." The lawyer said with a look of sympathy he could not conceal. My mind was racing. How could this be happening? The ground seemed to vanish beneath me, and I felt a profound dizziness. My house, the place where every corner held a memory, every stone in the garden told a story, was no longer mine, all because of a betrayal from my own son. The agents began removing my belongings. I tried to protest, but one of them held me firmly by the shoulders, though not aggressively. "Please, sir, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We'll help you gather some clothes and essential personal items," one of the agents said with genuine sadness in his voice. He knew who I was, perhaps remembering the young man who once helped build houses in the neighborhood. Disoriented and unable to fully grasp the extent of what was happening, I wandered aimlessly with the few clothes they managed to give me, walking through streets where every neighbor seemed to offer a sympathetic and disheartened glance. The gravity of my situation began to sink in only as the sun started to set, and I found myself without direction. Wandering through the increasingly cold streets of the city I had helped build, which now seemed to have turned its back on me, or rather it was my son who had done so. The night arrived, bringing with it a sense of abandonment and despair I had never experienced before. My son's words from the previous day echoed in my mind. "Dad, it's just a signature. How could he do this to me? How did I fail to see what was happening right in front of me? The solitude of the night wrapped around me like a heavy, cold cloak. I sat on a bench in the square, staring into the void, questioning everything I had done in my life. Tears began to flow freely down my wrinkled face, not only for what I had lost, but also for what I failed to recognize. The boy I taught to walk, talk, and respect others had become a stranger, driven by greed and unchecked ambition. There, under the dim light of the square's street lamps, while the city slept, I remained awake, confronting the harsh reality of a betrayal that shattered my heart. It was a turning point, a moment to either break down or find strength. I needed to decide what to do next, but in that instant, all I could feel was the weight of sadness and abandonment. Sitting on a time-worn chair in a square that had witnessed many childhood stories, I looked down at the ground covered with fallen leaves carried me away into memories of a time that seemed to belong to another life. Now I was a well-known and respected businessman, but every stone, every tree in that square brought me back to my humble beginnings. "Do you remember Juan?" I said aloud, not realizing I was speaking to the invisible friend of my youth. Do you remember when we ran barefoot here, dreaming of the days when we'd have more than just torn pockets? I grew up in a modest neighborhood where each day was a struggle and each night brought dreams of a better future. My father worked with his hands and my mother cleaned houses for those more fortunate than us. They were heroes without capes, facing the harsh reality of our existence to give us something resembling a decent life. From a young age, I learned the value of hard work. By 8, I was already accompanying my father to construction sites where he, with his calloused hands and face always covered in sweat and dust, taught me about the world through bricks and cement. "This is how you build a life, son, one brick at a time," he would say, and those words echoed in my mind as I watched his precise movements. We didn't have much, but what we did have was earned through daily sweat and sacrifice. Our small house, always in need of repairs. It was our castle. My father and I spent weekends filling holes in the walls, painting the worn wood, and dreaming of the day we could do more than just minor repairs. "You're going to study and become someone important," my mother always said with such conviction that it made me believe it was possible. I clung to those words, studying by candlelight, since electricity was a luxury we couldn't always afford. Books were my greatest allies, transporting me to worlds where poverty didn't limit the characters, and I dreamed of being like them. As I grew up, hard work and determination began to pay off. I got a job as an assistant at a construction company, and every brick I laid, every wall I built, was a step toward my dream of changing my reality. Over the years, experience taught me not just to build walls, but to build a life. When I finally opened my own construction business, the sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. "Look at what you've achieved," my mother said, with tears in her eyes the day I showed her the family name on the plaque of the new company headquarters. "You fulfilled everything you promised, son." But as I sat in that square, watching the leaves fall as if dancing to the rhythm of the autumn wind, I couldn't help but think about how, despite everything, what I had achieved was significant, but the greatest test was yet to come. In that same square where I had often reflected on my journey, feeling both the weight of responsibilities and the joy of accomplishments, I clearly remembered how each step was driven by hope and hard work. I had started my construction business with limited resources but immense determination. In the early days, it was just me and a small group of workers, many of whom were childhood friends from the neighborhood where I grew up. Together, we faced the scorching heat of the sun and the chill of the mornings to build structures that would become homes for countless families. "Each house we build," I would tell my team, "is a home, a dream come true." Over the years, the company grew with each completed project, and my name and business gained more recognition. However, beyond business success, the real victory was seeing the pride in my parents' eyes. They visited each new project, walking slowly, but with smiles that revealed profound pride. "It's amazing to think that it all started with you helping your father with the construction," my mother would comment, her gaze lost in memories of a simple yet meaningful past. It was in this environment of constant growth where I met my wife Anna when she came into my life like a gentle breeze on a hot summer day. Our first conversation happened by chance in a small cafe near one of my construction sites. She had come from a neighboring town to visit a relative. "It looks like you're building more than just houses around here," she said, observing the activity at the construction site through the window. Her voice was soft but filled with genuine interest that captured my attention. "I'm trying," I replied, a bit shyly. "Each building, each home carries a bit of my story." Our relationship blossomed quickly. Anna was a woman of strong spirit and a supportive partner who understood the demands of my work. When we married, it was in a small but joyful ceremony in the garden of that house that once belonged to my parents, the house I had renovated and expanded, which now symbolized my success and roots. When Carlos was born, our happiness felt complete. He was a lively child with a smile that could brighten the darkest days. "He'll be a great man one day, just like his father," Anna whispered as she rocked him, her eyes shining with love and hope. Raising Carlos and watching him grow in a home full of love and security was my greatest joy. I made sure to teach him the value of hard work, honesty, and the importance of staying true to one's values. I taught him not just about business, but also about life, about respecting people and valuing every opportunity. "Life is like a construction project, Carlos," I would say, as we walked together through the neighborhood where I grew up. "Every decision, every choice is like a brick. You must place them carefully because they form the foundation of everything you will become." Those memories, those precious moments of life and learning were what I cherished most. As I sat in that square, immersed in my memories, a part of me wished I could turn back time and relive every laugh, every conversation, every embrace. But life, like construction, moves forward, and what remains are the foundations we build. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink as Carlos and I walked through our old neighborhood. He had grown into a young entrepreneur full of ideas and ambitions since I introduced him to the family business. He had shown a natural aptitude for tackling the challenges of the construction industry, and it was a source of pride to see him so involved. Yet there was also an unease I couldn't fully explain. "Dad, I've been thinking about the development of our company and how we can further expand our market presence," Carlos began, with a spark of enthusiasm in his eyes that reminded me of myself in my early days. "Younger years, I hear you, Carlos. What's on your mind?" I asked, trying to mask the growing anxiety inside me. "The neighborhood is changing and expanding," he said. "I think we should take advantage of this transformation. We could build a complex of apartment towers right here where our house is." His confidence, typical of youth, struck me like a punch. The house, where I grew up, where my parents lived and passed away, where every corner was steeped in a lifetime of memories, could be demolished for a cold, impersonal project. "Carlos, this house is not just a property, it's a legacy, a living memory of you grandparents, your mother, and all the battles we've faced together. It's not just about money or an opportunity," I replied, my voice heavy with emotion. He stopped and looked at me, surprised by the intensity of my reaction. "But Dad, think about the potential. It's a unique opportunity for a significant financial return. Isn't that what we've always been after?" "There are things that are worth more than money, Carlos. Some legacies need to be preserved, not sold to the highest bidder," I countered, hoping he would understand the value of history and continuity. Carlos was silent for a moment, reflecting on my words. "I understand your perspective, Dad, but I also need to consider. In our future, I'll prepare a detailed proposal and show that this can be beneficial for all of us," he said finally, with clear determination in his voice. As Carlos grew, he became more involved in the company I had built with so much effort. He was no longer just my son, but also my business partner, someone in whom I placed my hopes and dreams for the future of our family. His business instincts filled me with pride, and his youthful energy brought new ideas and perspectives to our company. On a hot summer afternoon, we were sitting in the office reviewing the expansion plans Carlos had developed. "Dad, I have a proposal that could really take our company to the next level," he began, his eyes shining with enthusiasm and a hint of anxiety. I listened attentively, a smile forming on my lips at the passion with which he spoke. However, my smile quickly faded when he unfolded the map of the region and pointed to a spot that was more than just a piece of land to me. "We're considering building an apartment tower complex here," he said, pointing directly to the location of our family home. "It's an ideal central location with enormous potential for appreciation. A shiver ran down my spine as I looked at the house he was indicating. I grew up where my parents lived, and where so many of our family memories are still present in every wall and every stone in the garden. Carlos, this is our home, I said, with more firmness than I truly felt. This is more than just a piece of land. It's where I grew up, where your grandmother planted that old apple tree. I understand, Carlos interrupted, his youthful impatience making his voice a bit sharper. But we need to consider what's best for the business. Imagine how many families we could accommodate here, how much we could grow. Your grandparents built this house with their own hands, I continued, my words laden with emotion. Every brick of this house holds a story, a memory that we can't just destroy to make way for apartments. Carlos seemed frustrated, perhaps unable to fully grasp the sentimental value that this place held for me. But Dad, the world is changing. We need to adapt and innovate. Since when does destroying our memories equate to innovation? I replied. The house where your grandmother taught me to value the simple things in life. Carlos sighed, leaning back in his chair, the weight of our discussion hanging in the air, as thick as the summer heat accumulating in the poorly ventilated office. I just want to do what's best for everyone, he said finally, his tone weary. Preserving our history is the best thing we can do, I replied with clear and firm resolve. This house, our home, will remain. The tension between us didn't dissipate that day. Carlos left the office with an expression that mixed frustration and confusion, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew he had good intentions, but not at the expense of our family heritage. Sitting in his leather chair in the office he once shared with his son, the air was thick with anticipation and disappointment. He had called an urgent meeting with all the company directors, an encounter that would determine the future of everything he had worked for his entire life. The directors, some old friends and others longtime partners gathered, exchanging looks of concern and curiosity. I appreciate you all coming on such short notice, he began, his voice steady but visibly emotional. Today, we need to discuss the future of our company and, more importantly, the integrity upon which it has been built. There were murmurs of agreement. He paused, looking at each of them before continuing. I discovered that the documents my son Carlos asked me to sign, supposedly for simple administrative formalities, were actually for the transfer of control of the company and our family property. A visible shock rippled through the room, accompanied by murmurs and incredulous glances. As his words sank in, he raised his hand to silence the room and added, "These actions will have no effect while I am alive." My lawyer, a longtime friend and trusted advisor, suspected the intentions behind these documents and altered them without my son's knowledge. These documents will only become valid after my death. The revelation brought a mix of sighs of relief and expressions of sadness over such a close betrayal. Given these events, he continued, his voice gaining strength, I have made the difficult decision to remove Carlos from all his roles in the company. This is not just a matter of business, but of moral and family principles. The directors reacted, some visibly relieved to see that the integrity of the company was being preserved. It is not easy for me as a father to make this decision, he added, but as the founder and president of this company, I have a duty to protect not only our legacy, but also the values that have brought us this far. He paused, allowing his words to be absorbed. The house that my father built, where I grew up, and where I hoped my son would also grow up, is not for sale. We will continue to operate with the principles of integrity, hard work, and respect for the community that have always defined us. After the meeting, as the directors left with a new understanding and a renewed sense of purpose, he remained alone in the office, gazing out the window at the garden where he and Carlos used to play ball, As the last directors exited, a heavy silence settled over the room. It was then that the door burst open and Carlos stormed in, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "How could you do this to me, Dad?" Carlos shouted, slamming the door behind him. "Carlos," he began, trying to stay calm amidst the brewing storm, "I did what was necessary to protect the company and the values it represents." "And what about family values?" Carlos retorted. "You're pushing me away. You're treating me like a stranger." His voice quivered with emotion and a sense of betrayal. "It's not easy for me," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully to avoid causing further pain. "But you have crossed a line. The betrayal you attempted against our family, against everything your grandfather and I built, cannot be ignored." Carlos paced back and forth, clearly struggling to process the situation. "So, is that it? Are you going to exclude me from the will too?" He took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would change their relationship forever. "Yes, I am transferring the management of the company. I am transferring the management of the company to a trusted friend, and as for the inheritance, you'll need to learn to support yourself. It's the only way you will truly understand the value of work and life. You're leaving me with nothing," Carlos said, disbelief evident in his voice. "I'm giving you the chance to grow on your own and forge your own path, independent of what I or anyone else has built. That's more valuable than any amount of money I could leave you," I explained, my voice firm but heavy with deep sadness. Carlos stopped, breathing heavily, and looked at me. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one with innocent dreams and aspirations, before being consumed by greed and ambition. "I don't know what to say," Carlos said. "You don't need to say anything now," I replied. "In time, I hope you will see this as an act of tough love. It's still love, though. You will always be my son, and I will always hope you return to the values that truly matter." Carlos stood there for a long moment, his eyes filled with tears he refused to shed. Finally, he nodded slowly, turned around, and left the office, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of a decision that, although painful, I knew was the right one. I looked out the window, watching the shadows lengthen with the setting sun. It was the end of a chapter in our lives, but I had faith that over time this could mark the beginning of something new and better for Carlos. Perhaps one day he would understand and appreciate this final lesson. Years had passed since that fateful day when I made the hardest decision of my life, to distance myself from my son Carlos and let him find his own path. The office, which had once been a place of joint decisions and passionate discussions about future projects, had undergone many changes, but none as significant as that one. On a quiet autumn afternoon, as I reviewed some documents at the desk we once shared, I heard soft knocks on the door. I looked up, surprised to see Carlos standing there, visibly older, with signs of maturity and calm that he hadn't had before. "Can I come in, Dad?" His voice was calm, reflecting his new demeanor. "Of course, son," I replied, my heart racing with anticipation of what was to come. Carlos entered and sat down in front of me. He looked around the office, a faint smile appearing on his lips as he took in the changes, not just in the physical space, but perhaps reflecting the transformations within himself. "Dad, I came back because I needed to tell you something," he began, initially hesitating but gaining confidence as he spoke. "Over the past 5 years, I've built my own architecture firm. It's been difficult, very difficult without family support, but it was a necessary journey." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I've learned a lot, not just about building structures, but about building character and understanding life. And I wanted to thank you, Dad. At that time, I didn't understand your reasons. I was blinded by ambition, but now I see, and I'm grateful for what you did. The atmosphere between us was thick with emotions, a mix of regret and understanding, heavy but essential." "You were right," he continued, his voice firm yet filled with emotion. "Selling our house, The one you built just for financial gain wouldn't have been the right path. It took me years to truly understand and appreciate the value of what cannot be measured in money. My heart warmed hearing his words. "Carlos, that means a lot to me," I said. He smiled, a genuine, open smile that I hadn't seen since he was a child playing in the yard. "I hope we can start over, not just as father and son, but maybe even as colleagues. I'd really like for you to visit and see what I've built. Perhaps there's something we can do together this time, with the right values." "I'd love that," I replied, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. "I'm proud of you, Carlos, not just for your success, but for becoming the man you are today." We stood up and embraced, a hug that symbolized not only our reconciliation, but also a new beginning. As he prepared to leave, he turned and said, "Thank you, Dad, for everything." With a gesture and a smile, he exited the office, leaving behind a sense of hope and renewal. Looking out the window, I saw not only the reflection of the man I had become, but also the promise of what we might build together this time, not just on concrete foundations, but on the principles of love, respect, and mutual understanding. If you enjoyed the story, please like it and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future exciting stories.